Well, thank you all for being here today. For those who happen to watch this online, we apologize. We're having some connectivity issues this morning, so if the video cuts out or scrambles or slows down or something, that's the reason why. But I'll go back over it and make sure it works properly. We are in Second Chronicles chapter 4. That's where we'll start today. But we may Second Samuel. Sorry, I know, man. All these, yeah. Wait till we get to Kings, then all heck breaks loose. Second Samuel 4, and we'll be correlating with First Chronicles 11. If you want to get your Bibles ready for that too. So let's go ahead and start sharing our screen here and get going. Share with presentation. Presentation. There we go. Okay. So yeah, 2 Samuel 4, verse 1. When Saul's son Ishmael heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed, and all Israel was dismayed. Saul's son had two captains of raiding bands. The name of the one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab. They were the sons of Rimmon, a Benjaminite from Beeroth, for Beeroth is considered to belong to Benjamin. Now the people of Beeroth had fled to Gittaim and are there as resident aliens this day. So Ishmael hears that Abner has been killed. We don't know whether he was told that he was killed at the hands of Joab or not. He just knows that Abner, his commander's dead. Well, the only two other people who could take Abner's place are they're commanders of these raiding bands that are going out, hit and run. And we'll find out here in a few minutes that he's not very confident in their abilities. But he didn't trust them very well. But his last hope in any kind of a military was Abner coming back to the fold to be his commander. And knowing that Abner's dead now, that just ain't going to happen. So Ishmael is probably freaked out at this point. Verse 4, Saul's son Jonathan had a son, who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, and in her haste to flee, it happened that he fell and he became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. So we have this secret son of Jonathan. We heard his name once before, but we didn't know it was Jonathan's son. Now all of a sudden we know that it's the son of Jonathan. Of course, Jonathan and David had this brotherly relationship, this lovely brother relationship. And so when David finds out there's a son of Jonathan, this is going to be a big deal for him. So anyway, but we find out what happened to Mephibosheth. He was crippled in his feet because his nurse dropped him when she was running from the war. So now the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, set out, and about the heat of the day, they came to the house of Ishmael while he was taking his noonday rest. See, leaders do sleep. Yeah. They came inside the house as though to take wheat, and they struck him in the stomach. Means they stabbed him. Then Rechab and his brother Baanah escaped. Now they had come into the house while he was lying on his couch in his bedchamber. They attacked him and killed him and beheaded him. Now this is two different incidents. What's happened is they come in, in this haste, acting like they're going to take, get some wheat because they're commanders. They're allowed in that area, and they stab him while he's resting. But in their haste, they run away, and they come back at some point later in the day and finish the job. At this point, he has managed to get himself to his bedchamber. So they kill him and behead him the second time.
He's dead now.
Yeah. Then they took his head and traveled by way of Hebron, of the Arabah all night long. They brought the head of Ishmael to David at Hebron and said to the king, "Here's the head of Ishmael, son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my lord the king this day on Saul and all his offspring." So we hear now that these two captains of Ishmael were actually secret agents of David. Or at least they believed, they followed David, at least, on the backside there. But what's interesting is there's no guards. Ishbaal, there's two ways to think about this. Ishbaal either is so confident in his kingship, in his royal position, that he doesn't think he needs guards, or his guards are so depleted that he doesn't have any to guard his home. Regardless of how you look at it, there's no guards listed for these two captains. Of course, it could be a third option would be that there were guards there, but the two captains, being their superiors, they just walk past them, and the writer doesn't feel the need to make that comment. But we just don't know. We just don't know. It's all conjecture. So, they thought they had killed the last male in Saul's and or in Saul's family, and David thinks the same thing. So. On to verse 9. David answered Rechab and his brother Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity. When the one who told me, see, Saul is dead, thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag. This was the reward I gave him for his news. Remember that? When Saul, the guy, the messenger. Yeah, the messenger came and told him, and David killed him because that wasn't his job to kill the king. Only God could do that. Well, David thinks the same thing. Verse 11, how much more then when wicked men have killed a righteous man on his bed in his own house? They're cowards for killing him that way. Right. And now shall I not require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth? So David commanded the young men, and they killed them. They cut off their hands and feet and hung their bodies beside the pool at Hebron. But the head of Ishbaal they took and buried in the tomb of Abner at Hebron. So strangely, Abner and Ishbaal are reunited in a way. But Ishbaal, being the rightfully anointed king of Israel at the time, is buried as a king would be. At least his head was. Just his head. Yeah. Ishbaal hadn't tried to kill David, at least yet, but there was that unwritten law of succession. So David does this, he commands all this in order to set an example and to honor his predecessor. So now we get this split screen between 2 Samuel 5 and 1 Chronicles 11. Most of this is pretty much the same with a few extra words added in, just more detail, but nothing new. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, look, we are your bone and flesh. For some time while Saul was king over us, it was you who led out Israel and brought it in. The Lord said to you, it is you who shall be shepherd of my people Israel, you who shall be ruler over Israel. So do y'all remember the song that was sung about David during all that? Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. Yeah, well, that was the song going out. So these so with Ishbaal dead, all of the people of Israel are now coming to David. David, you were Saul's right-hand man. We want you to leave. So all the elders of Israel. We're in 2 Samuel 5. I should have said that earlier. Yeah, it went to 5. Verse 3. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord. And they anointed David a king over Israel. Now, this is the third time David's been anointed. The first time was by Samuel, if y'all remember. The second time was by Joab, when they had gathered together at Adullam, when he ended up with those 600 people. They anointed him there. And so when they remember that guy brought the crown and the anklet or wristlet of Saul. So he gets anointed with that too. Now he gets officially anointed by all people of Israel. So it's official now. So verse 4 of chapter 5. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. So, I've always said when it comes to numbers in the Bible, they typically mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at numbers. 40 typically means a lot. Just means a lot. And so when we hear these things, they ruled for 40 years, this means they ruled a long time. But because the writer is pretty specific in his time, 40 years in this case may be a little more accurate than just a long time. But the way we get 40, he ruled in Judah. So at Hebron, he ruled for 7 years. But then when he went to Jerusalem, which we haven't got there yet, this is foreshadowing, he rules for 33 years. So he he ends up living to 70 years old. Oh. Quite a life.
That's young.
Yeah. We have some new information or some additional information in the Chronicles. So if y'all want to jump there, you can. First Chronicles 12. Otherwise, you can just watch it on screen. First Chronicles 12:23. These are the numbers of the divisions of the armed troops who came to David in Hebron to turn the kingdom of Saul over to him, according to the word of the Lord. The people of Judah bearing shield and spear numbered 6,800 armed troops. David's getting big, really, really quick here. You're going to see a lot of big numbers. Of the Simeonites, mighty warriors, 7,100. Of the Levites, 4,600. Jehoiada, leader of the house of Aaron, and with him 3,700. Now the Levites and Jehoiada, leader of the house of Aaron, those are all priestly. So, okay.
So they don't fight.
They won't fight. And Zadok, this is kind of funny because Zadok would end up becoming a temple worker as well. He would write some of the Psalms that we hear, or they would be attributed to him anyway. So Zadok, a young warrior, and 22 commanders from his own ancestral house. Of the Benjaminites, the kindred of Saul, 3,000, of whom the majority had continued to keep their allegiance to the house of Saul. Of the Ephraimites, 20,800, mighty warriors, notables in their ancestral houses. So in this page alone, we've got 37,700 soldiers and 8,332 clergy.
That's a lot of folks.
Yeah, you think about that. That's about 4.5. It's one minister for every 4.5 people. Man, based on this room, you've got 3 ministers. At least 2. Of the half tribe of Manasseh, 18,000 who were expressly named to come and make David king. Of Issachar, those who had understanding of the times. Ooh, that's kind of a weird phrase. To know what Israel ought to do. 200 chiefs and all their kindred under their command. That I mentioned that at the bottom, but Issachar, they would end up being his advisory staff, like our president's cabinet. That's what they would end up doing. That's what that means, the understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do. They're going to end up being his cabinet.
Not prophets.
No, not prophets. Most of the biblical writers are very clear when it was a prophet or a false prophet. So these are just smart people, probably educated, wise,
Prophets in waiting.
maybe, not religious prophets, definitely. Of Zebulun, 50,000 seasoned troops equipped for battle with all the weapons of war to help David with singleness of purpose. Of Naphtali, 1,000 commanders, with whom there were 37,000 armed with shield and spear. Of the Danites, 28,600 equipped for battle. Of Asher, 40,000 seasoned troops ready for battle. Of the Reubenites and Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh from beyond the Jordan, 120,000 armed with all the weapons of war. Now, you keep in mind, when David was at war with Israel, when his little band of people at the most, it ever mentions that he had 2,000 or 3,000 people with him. This is the armies he's battling. And we've already, on this page, he's got 160,000 soldiers. So it's 300 all over again, if you've ever seen that movie. It's David should not have won any battle against Israel based on numbers, but he was successful in everything he did.
Let me ask you, all these soldiers, are they located in one area? Okay, they're spread all over.
Correct. That's why it mentions them, well, it mentions them by house, but that, they would have lived within their tribes. So, and that thing over there, it's kind of why I left it in here, kind of shows where all they are. Come up here real quick. You've got Dan here, Zebulun, Issachar, Manasseh. Now Manasseh, it mentions half tribe there. You've got half of them here, half of them here. You've got Ephraim, which is that was the largest of the areas. It encompassed pretty much the whole desert. Ephraim, Gad, which was over here. You've got Benjamin and Judah. Benjamin, I'm not those. I don't necessarily agree with that placement. I believe Judah was a little higher and Benjamin was here, but regardless, they were both in that area of what we call Judah. You got Reuben way down here. You've got Simeon down here. We're missing Naphtali. No, Naphtali up here. Sorry, Naphtali there. So that gives you an idea.
People who used to be fighting against David and now you're
Yes.
fighting with him.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. They basically what this is they are announcing themselves. In military, we would call it a pass and review. Basically, they are individually announcing their loyalty to David. So 160,000 soldiers, 18,000 royal attendants, 200 plus cabinet members. Things are looking good.
With all these soldiers, who's he fighting?
Well, we'll find out.
Good question, yeah.
All these warriors arrayed in battle order came to Hebron with full intent to make David king over all Israel. So yeah, this is a pass and review. This is David and all and his people that he had with him standing in a booth and all the armies walking past him. So I did that a lot of times, so I know how it goes. Likewise, all the rest of Israel were of a single mind to make David king. They were there with David for 3 days, eating and drinking, for their kindred had provided for them. And also their neighbors from as far away as Issachar and Zebulun and Naphtali came bringing food on donkeys, camels, mules, and oxen, abundant provisions of meal, cakes of figs, clusters of raisins, wine, oil, oxen, and sheep, for there was joy in Israel. So the kingdom is reunited, and it feels so good. That's a song, by the way. Reunited. I was hoping somebody could catch that.
But I'm able to sing it.
Back to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 6. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem against the Jebusites. By the way, Jebusite, the original name of Jerusalem was Jebus. So the Jebusites are people who live in Jebus. So they're going to, okay. So
Didn't have somebody to fight.
right. They marched to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, "You will not come in here. Even the blind and the lame will turn you back." Thinking David can't come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, which is now the city of David. Okay, huh? We're not gonna let you in here. Okay. We're in. Oh.
Did what they want.
Well, David. Well, whatever it is, I don't know how to get it back. David had said on that day, it's got me.
Who got you?
Yeah, well, I've somehow clicked it over to, voice recognition. And so it's typing every bit of my words now. So hopefully this will click back over like that. I have enough trouble seeing this, except when it gets too small. I haven't done that yet. Where is my there? Okay. So David had said on that day, whoever would strike down the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, those whom David hates. Therefore it is said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. David occupied the stronghold and named it the city of David. David built the city all around the Millo inward. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. So what David is saying here, he's given, he goes up against Jebus, and the Jebusites tell him, you're not going to come in here. Even the blind and lame are going to turn you back. And so David says, well, the blind and the lame, you're the blind and lame. You're not going to be able to stop me. And so he orders his troops to go up through the water shaft, which is a shaft that it takes water in from the spring at Gihon into the city. So it provides them drinking water. At this point,
Open shaft? What, hollow?
well, it could have been. It was a covered shaft to keep out pollutants.
Well, they needed, if they were under siege, they could get water.
Correct. And what we find out in several battles that is how many of the armies were able to attack, is they would enter through the water system. Because that could be, now David is smart. Later on, he will actually put guards over the water, over the entrance to the water system. Work for him, so it may work for other people. So but he'll control it. At this point, before, as David's coming in here, Jerusalem is still under Canaanite control. There was no tribal claim to that area. So it's kind of weird that it's completely surrounded by the tribes of Israel, but the one place they didn't conquer would end up becoming the seat of power, the seat of religious power, royal power, all that of the Jews. We just kind of, in our reading, we kind of assume Jerusalem has always been Jewish, and it wasn't. So, verse 11, King Hiram of Tyre sent messengers to David. He'll come back later when Solomon's. King Hiram of Tyre sent messengers to David along with cedar trees and carpenters and masons who built David a house. David then perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people. So political alliances are starting. The king of Tyre, in order to, so and this may have been what, Ishbal may have done this too with Hiram. We don't know. It never says anything about that, but definitely Hiram wants to not be in bad favor with Israel. And so there's this political alliance. Hey, I'm going to send you some trees and some people who can work them, and let's build you a palace. We recognize your kingdom. In Jerusalem, after he came from Hebron, David took more concubines and wives. Oh, that's a problem. And more sons and daughters were born to David. These are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem. Shammua. Didn't they go to SeaWorld or something?
Yes.
Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet. Okay. Now, David forgot about this Levitical law concerning wives. Now, specifically, the Levitical law was for the priests. But in Deuteronomy 17, it talks about the leaders not taking too many wives. So I guess it's up to interpretation as to what constitutes too many.
More than one.
This will not be the first law that he forgets or doesn't. On to chapter 13. David consulted with the commanders of the thousands and of the hundreds, with every leader. David said to the whole assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you, and if it is the will of the Lord our God, let us send abroad to our kindred who remain in all the land of Israel, including the priests and Levites in the cities that have pasture lands, that they may come together to us. Then let us bring again the ark of our God to us. We did not turn it to it in the days of Saul. The whole assembly agreed to do so, for the thing pleased all the people. So the first order of business, let's get the ark to the capital. So 7 years have passed. 7 years have passed. Just in the first, or in the couple of chapters we've read, from the time he is anointed king till the time that he goes into Jerusalem and makes it his capital. So What he's doing is, he wants a whole assembly. He wants the ark to proceed to the capital with a lot of pomp and circumstance. And so that's why he's sending for the priests, which is a good thing because the priests supposedly know how the ark is to be brought properly, what the proper ritual is for that. So that's why he's sending for them. Okay. 2 Samuel 6. Yeah, I know. And it's cross-referenced with 1 Chronicles 30. It's all pretty much the same. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. David and all the people with him set out and went from Baalah, Judah, to bring up from the ark of God, which is called the name of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. Now, in the 1 Chronicles 13, it's funny that they would, it doesn't say where they go to pick it up, but in 1 Chronicles 13, it does say from Kiriath Jearim. Remember, that is where, if y'all remember when the Philistines took the ark, it went through all those different Philistine cities that got tumors or diarrhea or whatever it was, they got the plague. And so they send it back to Israel on a cart. And it ends up at this small town of priests, one of those priestly cities. Well, they never had any dealings with it, and they look into the ark, which causes most of them to die. Like 7,000 of them to die. Well, they don't want that with them either. So they send it to Kiriath Jearim. And that's where it has been, probably for 20 years. Okay. So that's where it's taken. So I'm back on to 2 Samuel 6 here, verse 3. They carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart. In some writings, Uzzah and Ahio are represented by Ephraim and Levi. And remember, I told y'all earlier that in other texts that we get to, we may get to, I don't know, depends on how long this class goes. Those names are referred to the biggest tribe, which is Ephraim, and the Levitical tribe, Levi, which has no holding. So what it's basically saying is everybody, including the priests, is what these two represent. So anyway, but yeah, these two sons are driving the cart.
I must not have thought very much of those stuff.
Well, if you've done any study of Exodus, you're going to find out here very quickly that there were specific rules on how to move the ark. Mouse. With the ark of God, and Ahio went in front of the ark. Yeah, in 1 Samuel 6, it was a split sentence there. David and all the house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all their might, with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. Okay, so they had drummers with them and harpists.
So it's a big party.
It was a procession like no other. It was a parade. Verse 6, when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him there because he had reached out his hand to the ark, and he died there beside the ark of God. Now David was angry because the Lord had burst forth with an outburst upon Uzzah, so that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. They're not carrying it properly. If you remember from Exodus, there were specific rules on how the ark was to be carried. It had to be carried by 4 priests with poles that, when they made with the instructions on making the ark, had these rings on either end of the ark on both sides where poles would be pushed through. And those priests were to, on each corner, pick up the ark with those poles. That way, none of their body ever touched the ark. They only touch the poles and the poles touch. So here they put it on a cart. It's not to be handled
Shame on them.
by beasts of burden. It's to be handled by the
They,
people of God.
have they forgotten, or were they just,
I think this is reminiscent of Samuel's two sons. Remember, they were kind of, I won't say iffy, they were pretty evil in themselves.
Swat.
And I think that, every time we hear two sons up, two sons up, two sons up, there's some kind of, I won't necessarily say evil, but there's something wrong. And we get the same idea here. Was Uzzah doing it out of, was he correct? To me, it seems like he's trying to keep the ark from falling on the ground. So he's doing what he believes is right, but it shouldn't have been on the heart to begin with. And that's what the anger of the Lord.
but somebody had to put it on the cart.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
So here is this parade of happiness and joy and dancing and singing and playing musical instruments, and all of a sudden someone dies. Wow, what a bummer. Verse 9, David was afraid of the Lord that day. He said, how can the ark of the Lord come into my care? So David was unwilling to take the ark of the Lord into his care in the city of David. Instead, David took it to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. Ooh, the Gittite. What does Gittite mean? That's someone from Gath.
Okay.
Philistia. It's going back to the Philistines. So the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. So David, after all this has happened, he's thinking, maybe we need to rethink this. Well, on here. So yeah, we're done for the day. Boy, that's quick. Next time, the Philistines, not again. The ark, let's try again. So yeah, it's the ark's travels are not done yet, and the Philistines come back into the picture. And we kind of got that foreshadowed in that the ark went to reside in the house of a Philistine.
So what about David's promise to Jonathan, the house of Saul would continue?
We get to that, but yeah, that was at the beginning of the class today, and nothing else was said.
Right.
We do get to that later. I promise you. It does come up again. It's foreshadowing. It helped with the story at that point because Ishmael is dead, and David now believes that there is no more son of Saul.
So he thinks that he's fulfilled.
Correct. Remember when he left Jonathan, that was the last time he ever saw Jonathan. Was there out in the middle of the desert. And apparently at that point, Jonathan didn't tell him he had a son because they didn't convert. Okay, well, I thank y'all. That was pretty cool.
No, it wasn't.
Class here. Go. Good. Don't you the